The military base sat quiet under the hot sun, far from the noise of cities and comfort of normal life. Dust rose from the training yard as soldiers shouted commands and dogs barked, each pair trying to move as one. Among them stood Jake, a young canine handler who had just received his newest partner, a large German shepherd named Rex. But this dog was different from the rest. Where the other canines obeyed with sharp precision, Rex only stared back in silence, his dark eyes cold and unreadable. Jake had been told about him before he even arrived. Some soldiers whispered that Rex was broken, too wild to train. Others said he had been through things no one should see. They called him the ghost dog because nothing could reach him. Still, Jake believed every dog could change with patience. He had joined the program because he loved animals and believed they understood things words could not say. So on that first morning, he walked up to Rex's cage with a calm voice and a steady hand. "Hey, buddy," he said softly. "I'm Jake. We're gonna figure this out, you and me." Rex didn't move. He didn't growl, didn't bark, just stared. His ears twitched slightly at the sound of Jake's voice, but his eyes showed no trust. When Jake opened the cage, Rex stepped out slowly, muscles tense, tail low, but still. It was not fear, but something heavier, something sad. Training began like every other day on the field. Jake gave simple commands, sit, stay, heel, but Rex refused to respond. He just walked in circles, sniffing the air, his gaze never staying still. When Jake raised his voice, Rex turned his head away, almost as if remembering something painful. By noon, other handlers started to laugh quietly. "Told you he's a lost cause," one said.
"He bit a sergeant last month."
"You'll see." Jake ignored them. He could see there was more behind those eyes. The dog wasn't angry. He was hurting. He didn't need more shouting. He needed someone to believe in him. But belief alone wasn't enough. Every attempt Jake made ended in failure. Commands meant nothing. Food didn't tempt him, and touch only made him flinch. That night, Jake stayed late in the kennel. The other dogs slept soundly, but Rex remained awake, sitting near the bars, eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. Jake leaned against the wall, exhausted but unwilling to give up. "You don't like people much, huh?" he said quietly. "That's okay. I don't like giving up." For a moment, there was silence. Then Rex shifted, lowering his head slightly. Jake noticed it and smiled faintly. "Maybe we'll start small," he whispered. He took a piece of beef jerky from his pocket and placed it near the bars. Rex sniffed it, then looked away. Minutes passed. Jake closed his eyes, almost ready to sleep, when he heard soft crunching. Rex had eaten it. It wasn't much, but to Jake it was a victory. The next morning, training continued, but things didn't improve much. Rex ignored most commands and refused to make eye contact. Jake tried patience, kindness, and calm authority. Still, nothing seemed to reach him. Each day felt heavier, the other handlers growing impatient, the officers losing faith. One afternoon, Jake overheard two soldiers talking near the fence. "They're gonna remove that dog," one said. "Too unstable." "They can't risk it." Jake felt his chest tighten. Remove him meant retirement or worse. He couldn't let that happen. Not after everything he'd seen in Rex's eyes. He knew the dog wasn't dangerous. He was scared. So that evening, Jake tried something different. Instead of training, he just sat near Rex's cage with a chair and a book. He didn't talk or give orders. He simply stayed. Hours passed and the base went dark, but Jake didn't move. Slowly, Rex walked closer, curious. When Jake looked up, their eyes met through the bars. There was no growl this time, no cold stare, just a quiet, questioning look. Jake spoke softly. "You've got fight in you," he said. "You just don't trust anyone yet." Rex tilted his head slightly, then turned away. But Jake saw the smallest sign of change. The dog didn't walk back into the corner as usual. He stayed closer, lying down near the bars. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Rex. He wondered what kind of life the dog had before he came here. There were scars on Rex's side, small ones that looked old, and his left ear had a notch like from a sharp object. Someone had written Rex 42 on his tag, which meant he was part of a combat unit before. Maybe he had seen something that broke his spirit. Over the next few days, Jake continued his silent approach. Instead of forcing Rex to obey, he let the dog watch him. He walked around the yard calmly, speaking in a gentle tone, never shouting. One afternoon, as Jake jogged around the training circle, Rex followed at a distance. It wasn't part of training, it was his choice. When Jake stopped, Rex stopped. When he sat, Rex sat a few feet away. That evening, Jake smiled to himself. "You're learning," he whispered, but the progress didn't impress the officers. The captain came by during inspection and frowned when he saw Rex just sitting quietly beside Jake. "This dog's not combat material," he said firmly. "If there's no improvement by the end of the week, he's done." Jake nodded respectfully, but inside fear settled deep. He had less than a week to prove Rex's worth. That night, he went back to the kennel again. Rex watched him enter with tired eyes. Jake sat down near him and said, "They think you're useless, but I don't. I see something in you, something good." For a long time, Rex didn't move. Then he walked closer, slow and cautious. His nose brushed Jake's boot just for a second, then pulled back. Jake didn't move. "It's okay, boy," he whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." In that quiet moment, something began to shift between them. The wall that had separated man and dog started to crack. It wasn't obedience, but understanding. The next morning, Jake arrived before sunrise. He opened the cage and Rex walked out without hesitation. Jake held the leash lightly and said, "Let's try again." He gave the same commands as before, his voice calm but firm. For the first time, Rex paused before disobeying. His ears turned toward Jake. The silence between them felt different now, less like rejection, more like thinking. Jake crouched down, meeting Rex's eyes. "I'm not your enemy," he said. "I'm your partner." Rex blinked once, then sat down slowly. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to make Jake's heart race. He smiled wide and gently patted the dog's shoulder. "Good boy." The other handlers stopped and stared. No one said a word. Later that day, Jake wrote a note in his logbook. Rex responded to voice tone and calm posture. Still cautious, but showing trust. It wasn't much, but to Jake it felt like hope. That night, as the sun set over the base, Jake sat outside the kennel again, watching Rex sleep for the first time without pacing. The soft sound of his breathing filled the quiet. Jake whispered, "We'll figure this out, partner. I promise." In the silence that followed, Rex's tail moved slightly, just once, tapping the floor. It was small, but it was enough to tell Jake that maybe, just maybe, the dog everyone thought was lost still had something left to give. The next week began with something unusual on the base. Early in the morning, before the sun had even cleared the hills, a convoy of black vehicles arrived. Soldiers stopped their work, watching as a tall man in a faded uniform stepped out. He was older than most on base, with gray at his temples and a deep scar running along his cheek. Everyone whispered his name, Colonel Mason. Mason had once been a Navy SEAL commander known for training some of the best K-9 teams in the country. He had been through missions no one spoke about, the kind of operations that changed men forever. Though retired from field duty, he was still called when others failed. And this time the base had called him for one reason. Rex dog Jake stood at attention as Mason walked by, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. The colonel's presence carried quiet power, the kind that didn't need words. He stopped near the training field, hands behind his back, watching the dogs and handlers move in perfect rhythm. Then his gaze shifted toward Jake and Rex. "Is this the one?" Mason asked. "Yes, sir," the captain replied quickly. "Rex, German Shepherd, age 6. Refuses all commands, shows no aggression but no cooperation either." Mason studied the dog for a long moment. Rex stood near Jake, calm but distant, his head slightly lowered, his tail still. "He's not defiant," Mason said quietly. "He's grieving," the captain frowned. "With respect, sir, it's been months. We've tried every method." Mason nodded slowly. "That's the problem," he said. "You tried to train him like a machine, but this one remembers too much." Jake didn't fully understand what Mason meant, but he felt something stir inside him. The colonel looked like someone who understood what pain did to both men and dogs. Mason stepped into the training ring and asked Jake to release Rex. "Let him come to me," he said. Jake hesitated but obeyed. Rex stood still, watching the older man walk closer. There was no fear in his stance, only deep alertness. Mason crouched down slowly, his eyes level with Rex's. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he waited, breathing steady, letting Rex sense his calm energy. After a long pause, Mason said one short word. It wasn't a regular command, it was something different, said in a firm, deep tone. Everyone around the ring froze. Without hesitation, Rex dropped down, chest flat to the ground, head raised slightly, waiting for the next order. It happened in seconds, so fast Jake almost didn't believe it. The dog who had ignored everyone now obeyed a stranger instantly. The air went silent. Even the birds seemed to pause. Mason stood up, brushing the dust from his hands. He remembers that command, he said quietly. It's from a SEAL protocol, one only used by combat units. That means this dog isn't just a failed trainee. He's a veteran. Jake stared, speechless. You mean he served? Mason nodded. Most likely.
He's not ignoring commands because he's stubborn.
He's waiting for a voice he knows. You've been speaking the wrong language. The captain stepped forward, surprised. So what do you suggest, Colonel? Mason looked at Jake. We start over. Not as trainer and dog, but as partners. You'll follow my lead. That afternoon, Mason stayed with Jake and Rex on the field. The colonel's methods were different from anything Jake had seen. He didn't shout or snap commands. He used short, calm phrases, and every move had purpose. He taught Jake how to control his breathing, how to stand, how to project confidence without aggression. Dogs like Rex read more than sound, Mason explained. They read energy. If you doubt yourself, he feels it. If you're calm, he follows. For the first time, Jake began to understand that handling a K9 wasn't just about orders, it was about connection. Mason told Jake to take off Rex's leash. The captain raised an eyebrow, clearly uneasy, but Mason ignored him. Trust him, the colonel said. Jake unclipped the leash and Rex stood freely. The dog looked around the field, then back at Jake. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then slowly, Rex walked to Jake's side and sat down. The colonel smiled faintly. See, he doesn't need force. He needs to know he's not alone. Over the next few days, Mason stayed on base working with Jake and Rex every morning and evening. He shared bits of wisdom that came from years in the field, lessons not found in manuals. Sometimes he would tell small stories about missions long past, where dogs had saved men's lives in places few would ever know. Rex was probably one of them, Mason said one night, a soldier's partner. When you lose your handler in combat, it's like losing half your soul. These dogs don't forget. Jake listened quietly, watching Rex lying nearby. The dog's eyes were half closed, but his ears twitched every time Mason spoke, as if remembering pieces of another life. As the days went by, Rex began to change. He started responding to small gestures, following Jake's movements instead of ignoring them. The first time Jake threw a training dummy, Rex hesitated for a moment, then ran after it. When he returned it, the whole team watching from the sidelines began to clap softly. It wasn't just a trick. It was trust coming back to life. One evening, after another long day of work, Mason walked beside Jake as the sun set over the field. You're doing well, he said. But remember, this isn't about obedience. It's about healing. That dog's been through something he hasn't let go of yet. Jake looked at Rex, who was trotting beside them calmly. Do you think he'll ever be the same? Mason shook his head. No, none of us ever are. But he can find peace. That's enough. Later that night, Jake stayed by Rex's side again the same way he had before, but this time it felt different. The silence between them wasn't cold anymore. Jake felt that the dog trusted him now, at least a little. He reached out a hand slowly and Rex didn't pull away. Mason watched from a distance, arms crossed, a faint smile on his face. That's it, he murmured to himself. You're both learning. The next morning brought another surprise. During a group exercise, the captain asked each K9 team to perform a sequence of search and command drills. When it was Jake and Rex's turn, everyone held their breath. Jake gave the first command, calm and clear. Rex paused, eyes locked on him. Then, to everyone's shock, he obeyed, sitting perfectly still. The next command came, stay. Rex didn't move even as distractions filled the air. Finally, Jake gave the release word. Rex ran forward, locating the hidden target with flawless precision. When he returned, Jake knelt down, smiling wider than he ever had. He didn't need to say anything. The bond was there now, strong and unspoken. Mason nodded approvingly. That's a soldier, he said quietly. And so are you. The base that once saw Rex as broken now watched him with respect. The same soldiers who laughed before now cheered. Even the captain couldn't hide his astonishment. Looks like you were right, Colonel, he admitted. Mason just smiled. No, he said. The dog was right. He just needed someone willing to listen. That evening, Jake found Mason sitting outside the barracks looking at the stars. He sat beside him and asked softly, Sir, that command you gave him, the one he remembered. What did it mean? Mason was quiet for a long moment. It's not something we use in normal training, he said. It's an old SEAL word. It means protect your own. His last handler used it in the field. That's why he remembered me, because my voice sounded like his. Jake felt a lump in his throat. So every time we gave him new commands, it reminded him that his partner was gone? Mason nodded slowly. Exactly. He wasn't ignoring you, son. He was waiting for someone who spoke the same promise. Jake looked down at Rex lying peacefully beside them, his eyes half closed but calm. The dog had finally stopped running from his past. That night, as the base lights dimmed, Jake whispered to himself, "You're not alone anymore, Rex. You've got me now." And for the first time, Rex lifted his head and let out a soft, low bark, not one of warning but of acknowledgement. It was quiet, but to Jake it felt like the loudest promise in the world. The next morning, the base was quieter than usual. A light mist hung over the training field, softening the harsh lines of barbed wire and concrete. Jake arrived early, as always, with Rex walking calmly beside him. The once wild dog now moved with a quiet confidence, his ears twitching to every sound, his eyes alert but peaceful. The other soldiers noticed the change, and even those who had doubted him now nodded in quiet respect. Colonel Mason watched from a distance, arms folded. He didn't smile often, but there was pride in his eyes. After the morning drill, he called Jake to his office. Inside, the walls were lined with photos of men and dogs, teams who had served together in silence and trust. Mason pointed to one photo showing a young soldier kneeling beside a German shepherd that looked strikingly like Rex. "That's Sergeant Cole," Mason said, "and that's Rex 2 years ago." Jake stared at the picture, speechless. The man in the photo had a kind face, his hand resting gently on Rex's head. "He looks so young," Jake murmured. "He was," Mason said softly. Cole was a SEAL K-9 handler. They were deployed in a desert operation. During an ambush, Cole was hit. Rex stayed by his side for 2 days before the rescue team found them. He refused to move, wouldn't eat, wouldn't drink. They had to sedate him just to get him out. Jake's heart sank. It all made sense now. The distant look, the refusal to obey. Rex wasn't being stubborn. He was mourning. Mason continued. After that, Rex was transferred between bases. No one could handle him. He was too loyal to let anyone else in. You were the first one who didn't try to force him. Jake felt a mix of sadness and determination. He looked at the photo again and whispered, "He didn't lose his partner. He lost his reason to follow anyone." Mason nodded. "Exactly. But loyalty like that never dies. It just waits to find another purpose." Later that day, Mason brought Jake and Rex to a different part of the base, a quiet training area near the woods. "From now on," Mason said, "you're not training commands. You're building language." Jake frowned slightly. "Language?" Mason smiled faintly. "Yes, every dog has its own rhythm. Cole used his own tone, gestures, even breathing patterns. We'll find what Rex responds to naturally." They started simple. Mason showed Jake how to align his movements with his words, how to make his tone gentle but firm, and how to watch for small signs, like the way Rex's tail flicked when he understood something. At first, it was frustrating. Rex seemed uncertain, testing each sound and gesture before reacting. But slowly, Jake began to feel the connection. He noticed that Rex responded not just to words, but to feeling. When Jake's voice carried calm confidence, Rex followed. When he hesitated, the dog froze. By the end of the week, Rex could walk beside Jake without a leash, following every move with precision. But what amazed everyone most was how gentle he had become. He no longer barked at strangers or flinched at sudden noises. The fear in his eyes had been replaced with quiet trust. One afternoon, Mason asked Jake to take Rex to the obstacle course. "Let's see how he handles movement under pressure," he said. Jake nodded and led Rex to the course, tunnels, walls, rope bridges, and tires. It had been months since Rex had faced a full-scale challenge. Jake gave the first signal. "Go!" Rex took off, leaping through the tires, running the length of the course with surprising grace. When he reached the high wall, he hesitated only for a second before jumping and pulling himself over. The soldiers watching cheered. Jake couldn't stop smiling. When the run ended, Rex trotted back to him, panting but proud. Jake crouched down, patting his side. "You did it, buddy. You really did it." Mason walked over, nodding in approval. "He's ready," he said simply. "Ready for what?" Jake asked. "For purpose," Mason replied. "You've given him trust. Now we give him meaning again." That evening, as the sun sank behind the trees, Mason invited Jake to his quarters. They sat outside, listening to the quiet hum of the base. "You've done more than train him," Mason said. "You've healed him. But there's one more thing you need to learn. Trust works both ways." Jake looked confused. "What do you mean?" "Rex needs to know you'll never give up on him no matter what happens. That's how his last partner led him. When Cole fell, Rex stayed because he believed his partner would get up. He'll do the same for you, but only if you earn it fully." Jake thought about that long into the night. He realized this wasn't just about the dog. It was about the kind of man he wanted to be, someone who stood firm even when everything went wrong. The next few weeks were filled with deeper training. Mason taught Jake how to handle search missions, how to use Rex's instincts for finding hidden objects and missing people. They spent hours in the woods, learning how to move silently together. Jake learned to read Rex's small cues, the lift of his ears, the pause of his step, the low rumble in his chest when he sensed something ahead. One afternoon, during a long session, Rex suddenly stopped, sniffing the air. Jake followed his lead, watching as Rex trotted forward to a patch of leaves. There, half buried, was an old torn glove. Jake picked it up, turning it over in his hand. Mason walked over quietly, looking at it. "That belonged to Cole," he said softly. "He used to wear those." Jake felt a strange stillness around them. Rex sat down beside him, staring at the glove, tail still. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Mason knelt and said, "Maybe this is how he says goodbye." Jake nodded slowly. "Then let's make sure he knows it's okay to move on." From that day, Rex seemed lighter. He played more, barked with excitement during drills, and even allowed other handlers to pet him. The soldiers began calling him the comeback dog. But Jake knew the truth. It wasn't a comeback. It was redemption. One evening, as Jake brushed Rex's coat near the kennels, Mason approached him one last time. "You've done something special, son," he said. "I've trained hundreds of handlers, but few ever learn what you did. You listened." Jake looked at him, smiling. "I just did what you taught me, sir." Mason shook his head. "No, you did what his heart needed. That's something you can't teach." The colonel turned to leave, but paused. "Tomorrow we test him in the field. It'll be a simulated mission, but it will feel real. We'll see if he can stay calm under sudden pressure." Jake nodded confidently, but inside he felt a small flicker of fear. The thought of Rex freezing again or getting scared worried him. But Mason's words echoed in his mind. Trust works both ways. That night, Jake sat by Rex's side as the wind blew gently through the trees. The moonlight fell across the kennel floor, painting soft silver lines. He placed his hand on Rex's head. "Tomorrow's just another day, okay? We've got this." Rex looked up, eyes calm and knowing. He gave a soft bark, the kind that felt more like a reply than a sound. Jake smiled and whispered, "Good boy." The base lights flickered off one by one as silence covered the field. Somewhere in that quiet between man and dog, a bond stronger than any command had formed. A promise that no matter what came next, they would face it together. The next morning arrived with the sharp sound of the siren that echoed across the base. It was the day of the big field simulation, the one Colonel Mason had been preparing Jake and Rex for. The air was cool and still, but everyone could feel the tension. Soldiers moved quickly, checking gear, loading blank rounds, and setting up training zones. It wasn't a real mission, but it was designed to feel like one. The team didn't know exactly when or where the test would start. That was the point, to see how everyone reacted under pressure. Jake stood near the truck with Rex beside him. The dog's fur shimmered under the morning light. He looked calm but focused, tail still, eyes following every movement around them. Jake adjusted his vest and crouched down, brushing Rex's ear gently. "You ready, partner?" he whispered. Rex's ears twitched and he gave a small, confident bark. Colonel Mason approached them with his usual steady steps. "Remember," he said, "this isn't just about skill. It's about trust. If you panic, he panics. If you stay calm, he'll know what to do." Jake nodded. "We're ready, sir." Mason gave a faint smile and walked off toward the observation post. The simulation began quietly. Jake and Rex were part of a small search team moving through the outer fields. Their goal was to locate a missing soldier dummy hidden somewhere in the terrain. At first, everything went smoothly. Rex followed Jake's hand signals and scent cues, sniffing the ground and moving in clean patterns. The air smelled of grass and dust, but then, without warning, a loud explosion thundered from the far end of the field. Smoke rose into the air and alarms went off across the base. The simulation had changed suddenly, part of the test. A surprise attack scenario. The sound froze everyone for a second. Jake's heart jumped, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Rex, stay," he commanded. The dog lowered to the ground but trembled slightly, ears flat. The deep echo of the explosion had stirred something old inside him, something from before. Jake recognized it immediately. Rex wasn't reacting to the drill. He was remembering real battle sounds. His body was tense, breathing fast, eyes flicking around as if searching for something lost. Jake's mind raced. He couldn't let him shut down now. He knelt quickly beside Rex and spoke softly. "It's okay, boy. It's just training. You're safe. You're not there anymore." But Rex didn't move. His gaze stayed distant, lost in old memories. Colonel Mason saw what was happening from across the field. Without a word, he began walking toward them, his steps slow but purposeful. The soldiers around didn't dare interrupt. They all knew this moment wasn't about drills, it was about something deeper. When Mason reached them, he didn't shout or rush. He stood a few feet away and watched Rex carefully. The dog's chest was heaving, his tail stiff, his mind trapped somewhere far away. Mason took a deep breath and then gave a single, calm command, the same word he had spoken the first day they met. The sound cut through the noise like a bell through fog. Rex's ears twitched. His trembling slowed. His eyes flicked toward Mason. The command wasn't harsh, it was familiar, like a voice from the past calling him home. Slowly, Rex rose to his feet, body still tense but controlled. Mason's voice came again, low and steady. "Good boy. You're not in danger. You're here with your team. Remember who you are?" Jake stepped forward, taking Mason's cue. "That's it, Rex. We're right here." The dog's breathing steadied. Then, as if shaking off the weight of his memories, he let out a short bark and looked toward the smoke. His stance shifted, alert, ready. Jake gave a hand signal and Rex sprinted forward. The soldiers watching held their breath as the dog moved through the grass, following the scent line toward the mock explosion area. Minutes passed like hours. Then through the haze of smoke, Rex appeared again, dragging the training dummy by the vest, tail raised high. He pulled it all the way back to Jake and dropped it at his feet. Cheers broke out around the field. Even the captain who had once doubted him clapped his hands. "That's one fine dog," he said under his breath. Jake dropped to his knees, wrapping his arms around Rex's neck. "You did it," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "You did it, buddy." Rex wagged his tail softly, panting with exhaustion but full of pride. Colonel Mason approached, looking calm as always, though there was a hint of satisfaction in his eyes. "That's the real Rex," he said quietly. "He's not broken. He's brave." Jake stood up, brushing the dirt from his knees. He just needed someone to believe in him again. Mason nodded slowly. That's all any soldier needs. After the drill ended, Mason asked Jake to walk with him. They moved away from the noise toward a quiet spot near the fence. The sun was lowering, painting the sky gold and orange. Mason's limp was more noticeable now, but his steps remained steady. "You did good today," he said, "but I want you to understand something. What you saw back there wasn't just obedience. That was healing. You gave him a reason to fight again." Jake looked down at Rex walking beside him, tail gently swaying. "He gave me one too," he admitted. Mason chuckled softly. "That's the thing about these dogs. You think you're saving them, but they're the ones saving you." For a moment they stood in silence, watching Rex sniff the grass near the fence. Then Mason spoke again, quieter this time. "When you gave him that first chance, you reminded me of Cole. He was the same kind of man, patient, steady, and kind. That's why Rex loved him so much. And now he sees that same heart in you." Jake swallowed hard. "I just didn't want him to be forgotten." Mason looked at him, his gaze soft. "You made sure he never will be." Later that evening, as the base lights came on, the team gathered for debriefing. The captain commended Jake for outstanding control and teamwork. He even recommended Rex for reinstatement as an active service dog. The whole room applauded, but Jake's eyes found Mason's across the crowd. The colonel simply nodded once, silent approval from a man who didn't need many words. When everyone left, Jake stayed behind, sitting on the steps of the barracks with Rex lying beside him. The night was calm now, the stars just beginning to appear. He rubbed Rex's neck gently and said, "You know, I think Mason was right. You were never lost, you were just waiting for someone to call you home." Rex looked up at him, eyes soft and shining in the dim light. His tail gave a slow wag. Jake smiled. "We're home now, partner. Both of us. Not far away, Mason stood quietly near the fence line, watching them with a faint smile. He didn't interrupt. He knew this was their moment. The bond that had begun in silence had now become unbreakable. As the cool wind swept across the field, Mason whispered to himself, "That's what loyalty looks like. Once a soldier, always a soldier." The lights from the training field flickered one last time before turning off completely, leaving only the stars above and the steady breathing of a man and his dog, two warriors who had found each other in the noise of a world that had almost broken them. The morning after the successful field simulation, the base felt different. The air was lighter, filled with the quiet buzz of admiration and respect. Soldiers greeted Jake and Rex with smiles and nods. The dog, who had once been called untrainable, now walked proudly by his handler's side, head held high, tail moving in calm rhythm. It was as if the entire base finally saw what Jake had believed all along. Rex was not broken. He had just been waiting for the right reason to trust again. Jake stood outside the kennel, brushing Rex's coat as sunlight filtered through the metal fence. The golden rays caught the dog's fur, making it gleam like polished bronze. "You did good, buddy," Jake said softly. "Real good." Rex lifted his head, ears twitching at Jake's voice, then leaned his head gently against Jake's arm. It was a simple gesture, but to Jake it meant everything. Colonel Mason approached quietly, carrying his cap in his hand. He moved a little slower now, his limp more noticeable after long days on the field. But his presence was still powerful, steady as a mountain. "He's ready," Mason said with a nod. "You both are," Jake turned to him. "For what, sir?" "For duty," Mason replied. "Command has decided to reinstate Rex officially as a K-9 partner. You'll be his permanent handler from now on." Jake's face lit up with emotion. "Thank you, sir. That means everything to me." Mason smiled faintly. "Don't thank me. Thank him. He earned it." He looked at Rex with quiet pride. "He's a soldier again in every way that matters." The next few weeks went by in a rhythm that felt almost peaceful. Jake and Rex began regular patrols with the team. Whether it was base security, search drills, or nighttime rounds, Rex moved with flawless focus. His training had become second nature again, but this time it wasn't just about commands. It was about understanding. Jake and Rex didn't need many words to communicate. A look, a hand gesture, or even a shift in breath was enough. They were in sync, like two halves of the same heartbeat. Whenever Mason passed by, he would pause to watch them work. He never said much, but his proud smile said enough. Jake knew the colonel had seen too much loss in his years, and seeing a partnership like this must have reminded him of something he'd once had. One cool evening, Mason called Jake to his office. The walls were filled with framed medals and faded photos of dogs who had served faithfully through the years. Mason gestured for Jake to sit, then placed a small wooden box on the table. "This belonged to Sergeant Cole," he said quietly. "It was found among his personal things after the mission." He opened the box and revealed a silver dog tag, scratched and worn, along with a small folded patch of fabric bearing Rex's old unit insignia. Jake picked them up carefully, the metal cool against his hand. "This was his?" "Yes," Mason said. "And Rex's. It's time to give them back to where they belong." Jake looked down at Rex lying beside him, his eyes calm and loyal. "He never stopped carrying him," Jake murmured. "Not in here." He placed a hand gently over Rex's chest. "He kept him alive." Mason nodded. "That's what loyalty looks like." The next morning, Mason arranged a quiet ceremony at the base memorial site. Only a few soldiers attended. A small flag waved gently in the wind as Jake stood beside Rex holding the silver tag. Mason spoke briefly, his voice steady but filled with feeling. "Some soldiers fight with rifles. Others fight with their hearts. This dog," he said, glancing at Rex, "fought with both. He never gave up on his partner, and thanks to Jake, he never lost his purpose." Jake knelt beside Rex and placed the tag around the dog's collar. "You carried his spirit, boy," he whispered. "Now you carry his memory." Rex stayed perfectly still, his gaze fixed on the flag as if he understood every word. The wind caught his fur, and for a moment it felt like time had paused. Even Mason blinked slowly, holding back emotion. After the ceremony, Mason approached Jake quietly. "You know, son," he said, "you didn't just bring a dog back to service, you brought a soul back to life. You've got the kind of heart every handler should have." Jake smiled humbly. "You taught me, sir." Mason shook his head. "No, Jake, I just reminded you to listen." The rest was all you. In the following days, life returned to normal rhythm, but everyone on base noticed how different things felt. Rex had become a symbol, not just of strength, but of hope. Younger handlers often came to Jake for advice, asking how he'd turned a broken K9 into a legend. Jake would smile and say, "You don't fix them. You just remind them they're still needed." As time passed, Jake and Rex grew inseparable. Whether it was long patrols in the desert or quiet nights under the stars, they moved together like one. Their bond was something words could never capture. One afternoon, Mason called Jake to the training field for a final session. The colonel stood near the fence, hands resting on his cane. "I'm heading back home soon," he said. "My part's done here." Jake looked surprised. "You're leaving, sir?" Mason nodded. "I go where I'm needed, son. And right now, this place doesn't need me anymore. You've got it handled." Jake wanted to say something, but his voice caught in his throat. Instead, he just nodded. Mason looked at Rex and said softly, "Take care of him, boy." Rex's ears perked up. He walked forward and sat at Mason's boots. Mason reached down, his old hands running gently through the dog's fur. "You were one of the best soldiers I ever trained," he said. "And you didn't need words to prove it." When Mason turned to leave, Rex barked once, sharp and clear, the same bark he used the first time Mason gave that command. The colonel paused, looked back, and smiled. "I'll take that as a salute," he said, tipping his cap before walking toward the waiting jeep. Jake watched him drive away, the dust rising in the golden light of evening. For a moment, he felt something ache in his chest, the kind of quiet sadness that comes when a chapter closes. He looked down at Rex, who sat beside him calmly, eyes watching the horizon. "He's proud of you," Jake said softly. "So am I." Rex turned his head, pressing his forehead gently against Jake's leg, as if he understood. As the sun began to set, the two of them walked toward the field for one last round of training before nightfall. Jake threw the training dummy far across the grass. "Go get it," he called out. Rex sprinted like a shadow, swift, graceful, unstoppable. The wind rippled through his fur as he ran. The same spirit of the soldier he once was burning bright again. When he returned, Jake crouched down and smiled. "That's my boy." In the fading light, the base lights flickered on, and a soft breeze carried the sound of laughter from the barracks. The world felt peaceful again. Jake stood with Rex at his side, both of them watching the sky turn orange, then purple. "You know," Jake said quietly, "maybe we're not just partners. Maybe we're both survivors." Rex gave a small, low bark, one of those sounds that always felt like a reply. Jake smiled. "Yeah," he said softly. "We'll keep going, together." The stars began to appear one by one, scattered across the dark sky. The base slowly fell silent. But out in the training field, one man and one dog remained, side by side. Two soldiers who had found their way back from loss, who had turned pain into purpose and silence into strength. And though the night was quiet, it carried a feeling stronger than any sound, a promise that true loyalty never fades, and some bonds once formed last forever.